welcome to this special broadcast on DD India. COP28, World Unites for Climate Action. Today is a big day at COP28 as world leaders take part in the two-day World Climate Action Summit that has gotten underway. The summit is an important moment for heads of states and governments to signal their commitment to transform key climate-related decisions into concrete actions and credible plans and continue raising ambition to tackle climate change. We will do an in-depth analysis of the developments as they take place at COP28 in Dubai. I'm Munmun Bhattacharya. Prime Minister Narendra Modi held bilateral talks with United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres in Dubai on the sidelines of COP28. PM Modi lauded United Nations support for India's G20 presidency. And day two of the COP28 Climate Summit began with host country UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan beginning the summit by announcing the establishment of a $30 billion fund for global climate solutions, specially designed to bridge the climate finance gap. The fund is designed to bridge the climate finance gap, as we said, and the UAE president said that objective is to stimulate $250 billion of investment by 2030.
When we committed to hosting COP28, we pledged to bring the world together to unite, work and deliver. We are finding practical ways to accelerate the world's transition to low-emission growth economy. The lack of readily available and affordable climate finance has long been one of the biggest obstacles in advancing climate action globally. Therefore, I am pleased to announce the establishment of a $30 billion fund Once again, I am pleased to announce the establishment of a $30 billion fund for global climate solutions.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in his speech said that burning of fossil fuels must be stopped outright and a reduction or abatement in their use would not be enough to stop global warming. He urged governments to regulate and legislate the price of carbon and adopt windfall tax on profits.
We cannot save a burning planet via fire holes of fossil fuels. We must accelerate a just, equitable transition to renewables. The science is clear. The 1.5-degree limit is only possible if we ultimately stop burning all fossil fuels. Not reduce, not abate, phase out, with a clear time frame aligned with 1.5 degrees.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived at the venue for the World Climate Action Summit in Dubai, UAE. Prime Minister Modi was warmly received by the COP28 host and UAE President and ruler of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, and the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. This forum will witness important deliberations to strengthen the efforts to overcome climate change and further sustainable development. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to deliver a keynote address at the opening session of the World Climate Action Summit later today. Prime Minister Narendra Modi shared a photograph with UAE's President and United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres in his social media platform X, and the PM said, and I quote, "Glad to join the COP28 summit, a pivotal platform for global climate action. Looking forward to engaging in meaningful dialogues and collaborations for a sustainable future. I thank my brother, His Highness Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres for the warm welcome," unquote. Earlier, leaders posed for a family photograph at the COP28 summit. World leaders have convened in Dubai for the COP28 Climate Summit ahead of the opening session in Dubai. And the first session of the COP28, the action is taking place at the sprawling campus of Expo City. Over 70,000 delegates, climate negotiators and other participants have come together to shape a better future for the planet at this COP session. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi met King Abdullah II of Jordan at COP28. There were discussions focused on enriching India and Jordan's deep-rooted friendship. Both leaders held talks on strengthening their ties further. Indian Prime Minister also met the Vice President of the UAE, Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, on the sidelines of the COP28 Climate Summit. Prime Minister Modi also met the Prime Minister of Netherlands, Mark Rutte, and leaders exchanged views on several issues on the sidelines of the COP28 summit in Dubai. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi met the President of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, and the President of Tajikistan, Emomali Rahmon, on the sidelines of the COP28 in Dubai. So let's get perspective now. It is day 2 of COP28 and day 1 of the World Climate Action Summit, a part of COP28 Summit in Dubai. To talk to us on that, we are being joined by Mukul Sanwal. He is a former Director, UN Climate Change Secretariat, and also Dr. Vaibhav Chaturvedi. He is a fellow with CEEW, which is the Council for Energy, Environment and Water. Pleasure to have the two of you here on DD India. I'll begin with you, Dr. Chaturvedi, on what are your expectations from today, from the Prime Minister's address, considering that India has lived up to the expectations of the world in terms of the climate action commitments that it has given, and also the way it's been delivering on them with novel initiatives, to name a few.
Great. Very good afternoon. Thank you for having me on the show. In terms of the expectation from Prime Minister, one is very clear. India has been a leader, has already shown leadership on climate actions in the last decade. And he should be and he is going to emphasize India's leadership and the various initiatives India has already taken, especially the global, not just domestic policy, but also global leadership that India has shown. For example, the International Solar Alliance, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, the Global Biofuel Alliance that we talked about in the G20 outcome. So many of those things which kind of demonstrate global leadership, along with rapid progress on renewable energy, on energy efficiency within the country itself. So the first is clearly about demonstrating India's kind of long-standing leadership on the climate agenda. Second, I think, is about emphasizing accountability in the climate discourse and the responsibility of the developed world. So the developed world has consistently, the historical responsibility has been one of the key principles of the United Nations agreement, the climate agreement, and the developed world has consistently kind of, not delivered on its commitments, both emission reduction commitments as well as its financial commitments. So this is a very important moment in which the Prime Minister, I'm sure, will talk about equity, common but differentiated responsibility, as well as accountability of the developed world. And along with this, there's some many other elements. One is clearly financing, that the developing world needs financial support, not in terms of high-cost loans. We are talking about low-cost finance, and that finance is extremely critical because now the climate debate is not really about directional change. Directional change has already happened. The climate debate now is about speeding up and scaling up. So speed and scale are the two keywords now. For that, finance is absolutely important. It's the Achilles heel of our progress in terms of achieving the 1.5 degrees goal.
Yes.
So that is probably very, very important thing, along with some other things like life that India has always championed. So life is going to be there, efficiency and renewable energy, tripling of renewable energy targets, many elements that India has kind of championed in the climate discourse. And I'm sure a lot of these will kind of resonate in his speech today.
Okay, Dr. Chaturvedi, stay with us. Let's take the same question to Dr. Sanwal now, who's with us in the studio. Mr. Sanwal, what are your expectations from Prime Minister's address at the COP28? Can we say that it will be a three-pronged one, containing India's commitments, how India has delivered, being the voice of the global south, and again putting the focus on how climate finance and the necessary technological know-how has not been delivered by the developed world to the developing world?
See, I think we are at a pivotal moment because Prime Minister has successfully chaired the G20 summit and this matter was discussed there. The key point that the Prime Minister made in the G20 summit is that India is speaking for the global South. And I think that idea will go across to the COP28, that India is just not speaking for itself, but it's also speaking for the others who don't have that kind of voice, who don't have that kind of influence in these international meetings. Now, India is able to say this or adopt this kind of role because Prime Minister Modi has made it very clear to the policy makers within the country that India must and will do its best to take care of this global problem. India has not contributed to this problem. And the point that Prime Minister has made to a press interview a little earlier has said that even though we are not part of the problem, we are willing to be part of the solution. So India's per capita emissions are about less than half that of the global average. But yet, India took to the G20 the notion that renewable energy should be raised to the extent possible. And every country needs to do whatever it can to the best of its capacity to take care of this problem. I think the third point the Prime Minister will make is that countries will do whatever they can because they have to balance the needs for poverty, reduction and spreading energy, and the need to take care of the climate problem. But to do more, they need more assistance. So he's not saying that unless you give me assistance, I will not do anything for the climate. The point he's making is, and that I think has been accepted across the world, that look, here is a country which has not contributed at all to this problem, which is not likely to cause harm or contribute to this problem even in the future, the way our lifestyle is, but is prepared to come out and is coming out with constructive suggestions. Now, one constructive suggestion is that let's look at the lifestyles of an issue. See, the real problem with climate change is that we are still debating what is the cause of climate change and not just the solutions. So what he is saying is, in effect, is that when the rural population moves to cities and people start using energy in cities, in buildings, in transport, in infrastructure construction, it is this cumulative impact that has led to climate change, to the worsening of climate change, and we must change our lifestyle. He's made this point very forcefully, and it resonates with a lot of people because Africa has not at all contributed to the problem. Now, you can't expect the Africans to have the same kind of policies as the Europeans or the United States. So he's making that point forcefully. And he's able to make that point because he is doing whatever he can within the country. The last point I want to make is that his call for climate justice in the United Nations has now become an important matter of climate change research and academic work. Just last month, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology had a workshop on this. How do we bring in climate justice and social issues into the teaching curricula? Now, that is the kind of impact his call for climate justice has had, and it is a visible manifestation of the kind of impact he has had on the policies of other countries that, look, you cannot expect people who have not contributed to the problem to bear the entire cost of the solution, but they will do whatever they can, and we must support them to do the rest. It is this reframing or rephrasing that I think is very, very significant.
Okay. So can we expect a clear roadmap then on issues on which the developed countries need to deliver on? Dr. Chaturvedi, the departure statement of the Prime Minister refers to how he said that we hope to have credible progress on the new collective quantified goal on climate finance. Is that a key expectation? Can we know the way forward for climate finance going forward?
Well, as I said, that's an absolutely important expectation from this COP. So this COP also is known as a GST COP. GST is essentially global stocktake.
Yes.
And every year, of course, we understand the progress that is happening on various issues, but GST is an official part of the process. It was inserted in the Paris Agreement so that the world, every 5 years, it takes a stock of the issues, various issues on mitigation, adaptation, and means of implementation, which includes finance, and then ratchet up ambition. So that is the whole official part of the GST process. So essentially, which means that officially the United Nations and all the negotiators are going to look at the collective progress made by the world on various issues on which mitigation is one, and then finance is another big issue. So all the pledges that the developed world said, which is $100 billion by 2020 for mitigation, and of course the first day, many of these countries also made an announcement they have already met the $100 billion. But many in the developing world, including me, are very skeptical about how they measure finance. So all these grand announcements have been made that they've already met the pledges. I don't think it's the case at all. You have to look at the finer print, that are they including all the private finance also in these transactions? Because the text or the expectation is very clear that the finance has to be new and additional. And that is the point to be emphasized. It is new and additional finance that we need, not just all the financial flows that are kind of going on around the world. So that's why finance is a very important expectation. And just taking a step back, I think the issue is also of trust in the process, right? When you commit to something, you have to, deliver on it in an earnest way. And if you're not able to deliver, well, you should kind of acknowledge that you're not able to deliver. But what is happening on the finance issue, that there was a commitment, the delivery was not there. Now they're doing these very interesting and kind of definitions of all kinds and trying to prove a point that they've already delivered, right? Of course, there are enough researchers around the world who can very easily see through these kinds of announcements. So establishing trust in the process is absolutely important. So it's, as I said, it's critical for the developed world, not just to meet the 100 billion. Right now, we're not even talking about billions, we're talking about trillions, right? That's the need of the hour. The trillions is the need of the hours. In fact, the G20 declaration says around $5.8 trillion is needed as a support to the developing world to achieve the NDCs, which is pre-2030 number, right? So 5.8 trillion. So of course, developed world has to give a lot of support on the finance front. Hopefully, they will enhance ambition not by like 2 or 3 times, but by multiple times. Mitigation plus also loss and damage and adaptation front.
Yes. So, Mr. Sanwal, what is the big picture that we are seeing here when the global stock takes place at the COP28? What do you think would be discussed as far as climate finance is concerned? Also, in the larger picture, where do you put the loss and damage fund and the announcement that has just happened of UAE committing $30 billion in catalytic capital to launch landmark climate-focused investment vehicle at COP28? Where do these figure? Are they part of the overall climate finance or separate?
You see, again, let us look at the diplomatic history of the climate negotiations. As we have just heard, the initial stage in 1990s was that the funds must be new and additional, and the developed countries only committed, a firm commitment was made only for funds in form of grants, which would be used by developing countries to prepare their national plans. There was no firm commitment of grant funding for actions or activities or mitigation or adaptation on the ground. Now, gradually that has evolved forward, and when we look at the G20 meeting that the Prime Minister has just chaired, one can see that in the finance track, a new development has taken place. Basically, what has happened is that under Prime Minister Modi's leadership, we have got, this entire issue of finance has evolved to bring in the multilateral funding agencies like the World Bank, the IMF and the Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, as well as the private sector. Now it is clear that the scale of funds that are required, even for renewable energy, to make a substantial difference to global emissions, you will need a huge amount of funds. Now, no government can provide it, nor no bank can provide, multilateral bank can provide it, private sector, everybody has to get together and link up technology with it, but basically not make technology a condition, because we have seen that India is becoming self-sufficient in solar energy, a lot of people are preparing it, and the cost has come down. So I think the world is expecting, the global south is expecting him to bring those ideas across to Dubai. The idea that emerged under the Prime Minister's leadership in the G20, that we have to look at it in a broader perspective, and we have to make it practical and real. That is the point that the President from Abu Dhabi has also made that point, that it is not just pledges, they have to be acted upon. So I think there will be a lot of movement in this direction, that the scale will be met by all these sources of funds, and it will be more realistic because of time frames that are being set by the global stock take. Now the global stock take essentially is going to set certain timetables. There will be targets and there will be timetables. A target has already emerged from the G20 for renewable energy. India has said that afforestation is also a target for us, and energy efficiency is a target. Now, energy efficiency has been considered as some kind of a fuel, because if you become more energy efficient, you don't use fossil fuels. So it has the same impact as reducing the consumption of fossil fuels if you are becoming more and more energy efficient. So this entire package, I think, is going to come forward in the stocktake, and it will be brought together, I expect, by the Prime Minister bringing up the issue of lifestyle again, because all these factors are linked to lifestyles. If you want to cut down the waste of energy without affecting your lifestyle, that is what he's saying that we should do. It helps the climate directly. If you adopt more of public transport, metros or public transport, it affects the climate directly. Similarly, if you go, India's example is that which has been often quoted, that we have switched light bulbs from incandescent to LED now without any government subsidy. It's because it made economic sense, people adopted it. Prime Minister is putting it differently, more positively, in saying make lifestyle changes. You can do a lot. Each individual can do a lot. And I expect him to raise this issue of life, LIFE, which is a lifestyle for the environment. And I think he's going to bring up climate justice also in a way of saying, hey, don't pressurize us too much. We will do whatever we can, but you must do more because you have created the problem. So I think the global stocktake, if one looks at it in a more holistic term, is going to push the envelope forward, is going to take this entire issue more in a positive direction. And I expect that with the G20, the resolution behind him, which means the major 20 countries of the world, including the African Union also, which have supported that, I think Prime Minister will be able to give a push forward. And I'm sure his statements, his key points will be echoed by a number of other countries.
Okay, Dr. Chaturvedi, do you expect the announcements that were made during India's G20 presidency and the commitments that have been made there, the announcement of a Green Hydrogen Innovation Center to be steered by ISA, the International Solar Alliance, or the Global Biofuels Alliance that has been launched, or the LIFE initiative, as was referred to by Mr. Sanwal, to be there, while maybe in the negotiations, India could be making the point that a developing country like India, with a significant amount of people still trying to make ends meet because it is still an emerging economy, would not be able to phase out coal at this point in time. And coal is a very important part of India's energy mix with regard to its development needs. Do you think that that point could be made in the negotiations?
Yeah, I think all of these points should be made. So it's not either or. Negotiations happen on kind of multiple parallel tracks. And as you said, finance, accountability, justice, climate justice, all of these are points that are going to be highlighted. Now, coming to the issue of coal, of course, that has always been a kind of big sticking point. And it is bizarre because you see, the climate debate is actually not about coal. The climate debate is about all fossils. And India's stand has been that we should be calling out all fossils and we should say, either phase down or phase out of unabated fossil fuel use. So it has to be a fossil fuel aligned language. It makes sense. That's what also IPCC and science says. But of course, coal has been singled out in the text, which is very weird because it should be all fossils. And that is the point essentially India keeps on making, right? And now coming to India's own kind of policy about coal or India's own announcement related to coal at this kind of COP platform. Well, I think, as you rightly said, it's a developing economy. Energy demands and electricity demands are growing very fast, right? Now, in a scenario where it's a high growth economy, in a high growth economy, it's kind of you're not just talking about replacement, you're also talking about additions. So if you think any other economy, which is kind of a saturated economy, then largely a lot of renewable energy addition would happen. It could kind of replace existing coal or existing fossil fuel, right? So that's a replacement demand. In India, it's not just replacement, it has to be a lot of new addition that has to happen. So the scale of addition is such that it is very hard from the grid management perspective that you could just rely on a fast expanding grid through renewable energy, and you could phase out coal very fast. Practically, it's a very challenging thing for us to do on ground. And beyond the grid management perspective, which is essentially about electricity reliability and reliability of grid, it's also about affordability of energy. affordability is a very, very important concern. The cost of solar have fallen down in the past few years, which is a great development. But at the same time, the cost of batteries is hopefully it will fall in the future. But as of now, we are not really there. So imagining a grid which in 15, 20 years relies almost exclusively on variable renewable energy with batteries and is able to provide reliable grid electricity in a fast economic growth scenario, and that to affordable terms. Too many variables for us to think about, or manage. Very hard to achieve that in practice. And that is what propels India's position. It's a very realistic position. It's hard to reduce coal. As I said, there's no love for coal, but the love is for energy security, reliability, and affordability. And for a fast developing economy, these are important variables. So that's kind of the position. And rightly, India is talking about fossil fuel phase down rather than coal, because the science talks about fossil fuel, not just any one particular fossil fuel.
Stay with us, Mr. Sanwal and Dr. Chaturvedi. Let's take a look at some of the excerpts from an interview that Prime Minister has given to a UAE-based newspaper. So in an interview to Al-Ittihad, the Prime Minister highlighted some of the steps taken by India to tackle climate change. Prime Minister said India and the UAE stand as partners in shaping a greener and more prosperous future. India and the UAE enduring relations provide support to the International Solar Alliance's Global Solar Facility. India and the UAE have emerged as leaders in global renewable energy efforts. Climate action must be based on equity, climate justice, shared obligations, and shared capacities. We must ensure that development priorities of the Global South are not compromised. The enduring relationship is founded on multiple pillars. The dynamism of the ties is expressed by the comprehensive strategic partnership. Cooperation between the two countries spans the entire energy spectrum with a strong focus on sustainability. India's mission, Lifestyle for Environment, is an initiative to motivate the world. During India's G20 presidency, India ensured that particular attention was paid to climate change. At COP26, India has presented Panchamrit, the 5 ambitious commitments of India. So let's take forward the discussion with the two guests. Mr. Sanwal, we've heard about the excerpts from the interview that the Prime Minister gave. Would you say that both UAE and India are very much on the same page when it comes to climate action? We've seen that in the previous meetings that the Prime Minister has had, for instance, the one that took place as recently as July 2023.
You see, there is a commonality of interest because both countries are looking at renewable energy as a source of energy for the future, for sustainability. But they are coming from different directions. India's total energy use is high because of the large population, although per capita use is very low. But it is a net importer of oil, and it has one of the largest reserves of coal in the world. So there is an interest in India to continue using fossil fuels, just as there is an interest in Abu Dhabi because they are oil exporters, they have large oil reserves. But I think the commonality of the interest comes in the fact that both countries, despite this resource base that they are sitting on, that they have at home, they are looking at renewable energy as an important element for the future. I think that is very important. The difference again is that while they are considered to be energy producers, we are energy consumers. So there is another commonality of interest here. In the long run, if there is more linkage between the economies, the thinking, and the policies, the climate policies of these two countries, it benefits both. Because they will use this linkage to meet the supply-demand needs or gaps or demands, but also use part of the money that they are generating either from the sale of oil in the case of Abu Dhabi, or instead of putting it in coal-based electricity, into renewable energy. And if that goes forward, I think it is important that joint production, technology transfer, exchange can take place. Here is a country which has got surplus money in the sense that they have the resources, they're not looking for finance, and India has the capacity to produce these things. So I think that is a very important component here that is likely to go forward. And the second issue is that they have both got a vision. When we heard the chairman of the COP in making his opening statement, it was clear that he had a vision. He said, look, we have to deal with finance right in the beginning, not at the end. So far in every single conference, all 27 conferences of the parties of the Climate Change Secretariat, finance has been the last item to be negotiated. It was used as a tool to get some other concession. For the first time, and I repeat, for the first time in 27 years, the finance has been settled at the start of the negotiation. He's saying, look, here it is, and he has made a contribution. So this is the kind of signal that he has given with a vision. Similarly, Prime Minister comes there with a vision. He says there is something called climate justice, there is something called life, and there is something called people making a commitment to the best of their capacity. Let us not look at responsibility, which has been the trend so far for 27 COPs. Let us look at the word also that is relevant there of respective capacities. Let us meet the capacities to the fullest extent, and then if there is a shortfall, then we talk about meeting the gaps. Now, these are basic shifts that are taking place in the negotiation process, which we can see happening in front of our eyes, and I'm sure as this COP unfolds, we will see more of this change in the way these negotiations have been conducted for 27 years. And that, I think, is important, and that is a tribute both to Prime Minister Modi and the chairman of the COP and their meeting of minds.
Okay, so there is a commonality of vision and meeting of minds, you're telling us. Time for us to take a break, but our special broadcast, COP28 World Unites for Climate Action, will continue on the other side. Stay tuned.
COP28 begins in Dubai. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi at COP28. DD India reports from Ground Zero. Watch live and exclusive details, news views and analysis only on DD India. COP28 begins in Dubai. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi at COP28. DD India reports from Ground Zero. Watch live and exclusive details, news views and analysis only on DD India.
एक लंबे रक्तपात भरे युग का अंत धारा 370 के समाप्त होने से पहले।
For decades and decades, downtown area of Srinagar has always been symbolic of unrest, turbulence, turmoil, disturbances, and everything that has to do with the disruption.
पहले तो महीने में 20 दिन होता था हड़ताल, अब नहीं होती।
I'm right now standing in the middle of the Jama Masjid market, and this is how weekday here looks like.
दिन को होगा 1-2 करोड़ टर्नओवर है, बिल्कुल कैश टर्नओवर।
बंद क्या बंद? ये दुकान हालात बिल्कुल ठीक है, बिल्कुल ठीक है, कुछ नहीं होता है।
कश्मीर तो बेनजीर है, हीरा है, दंगा फसाद तो नहीं है।
The making of the Naya Kashmir or New Kashmir.
Welcome back. You're watching a special broadcast, COP28 World Unites for Climate Action. We are analyzing the developments as they take place on day 2 of the COP28 summit in Dubai. It is also the day 1 of the World Climate Action Summit, part of COP28. In Dubai, delegates at COP28 received a sweet surprise upon entering the hall. Complimentary chocolates with a crucial message. The wrappers has a message for them. It encourages them to collaborate in achieving the 1.5 degrees target, and the proceed from purchasing these chocolates in Europe will contribute to planting more trees worldwide. DD India correspondent Tapas Bhattacharya has more details.
In COP28, people are making a statement through chocolate. Yes, they are giving chocolate, but they are also making a statement through these things that are written here. I will get to you more information. So it's written store at max 1.5. What is that?
So 1.5 degrees is the goal of the Paris Climate Accord, and we really want to keep the 1.5 degrees maximum of weather change.
And it's also written 1.2 degrees and 420 ppm. And what's the significance of that?
Yes, so we are already at 1.2 degrees. so there's not much left to 1.5. So we have to act like really fast and cut down emissions.
So I want to know, you guys are giving chocolates here for free. What's the message that you guys are giving? Why giving these chocolates to the delegates here?
Yes, there were at one time like 6 trillion trees. Now there are 3 trillion trees. So we have to restore forests around the world because they suck CO2 from the atmosphere. It's not the solution, but it will give us more time to reduce emissions and then fight climate change together.
And there is also a statement that is there. What is that statement, you guys? What is the whole thing here inside this wrapper?
Yes, so this is the statement we have to delegates. It basically says that we need to restore the forests around the world and that we have to act really fast to fight the climate crisis.
So you see, these are the manner in which chocolates is bringing a major change in COP28. The delegates are getting these chocolates for free, but this is how they are making a statement in the world: plant more trees and stop cutting trees. And that's the only way you can restore carbon emission in the environment. With camera person Jashiv, this is Tapush Bhattacharya for DD India from Dubai.
India and Brazil, nations that have collaborated in the past, align on common goals in renewable energy, biodiversity preservation and climate adaptation. They share platforms such as IPSA, G4 and BRICS. India recently passed the G20 presidency to Brazil. Both countries, diverse in biodiversity, face climate challenges affecting their indigenous populations.
India and Brazil have forged a very close relationship over a long time. There are many common forums like BRICS, IPSA, G4, and India recently handed over the G20 presidency to Brazil. So we have now with us Amanda, who is here attending COP. Amanda, what's Brazil's presence here in COP and how do you see this COP activating for Brazil?
First of all, thank you for inviting me to speak a little bit about this. This is a very special year for Brazil because this is our first COP having Lula as our president again, because over the past 4 years our former president was a big climate denialist. So Brazil is once again attempting to achieve this role as a world leader in climate action.
Speaking about indigenous people, even though they constitute only 5% of the global population, the biodiversity of the world, 80% of them are protected by the indigenous people. Now we here at COP, we have an indigenous people day. So what's your opinion on that? What's your thoughts on that?
This is actually one of the things that I've been covering the most. I've been accompanying indigenous people in their climate action since the beginning of the year in different situations. And I absolutely agree that it's so important that indigenous people are here, that they have their own international pavilion. At the same time, I think it remains to be seen whether or not they will actually be heard on what they are speaking and what they have to say, because as I said, they are the environmental defenders. So it's very important that they are here, but it's also important that they are actually heard and taken into consideration in the decisions. Another important thing is to bring back to, like the communities on the ground, what is happening, what is being decided here, so that it's not completely disconnected, like what is decided and discussed in COP negotiations and the reality on the ground. So I think this is one of the big challenges, really making sure that the promises made by the COP president that this would be a COP that would listen to indigenous people, that it actually happens in the end of the event.
India and Brazil share many things, challenges, indigenous people's concerns, and in a common platform. Let's hope that this COP takes both the countries way ahead in addressing the climate challenges that we are facing. Thank you.
So the UN Climate Conference happens once a year to review progress in addressing climate change, discuss and negotiate additional measures agreed upon by the parties to the COP or COP, and decide on global climate action. Prime Minister Narendra Modi previously had so far attended COP21 in Paris in 2015 and COP26 in Glasgow in the UK in 2021. COP21 in Paris in November 2015, where the historic Paris Agreement was concluded and also the International Solar Alliance was launched. COP26 in Glasgow, Prime Minister Narendra Modi there announced Panchamrit, outlining the 5 key elements of India's action aimed at environmental conservation and climate protection. Converting these announcements into action, India submitted its enhanced nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, before the COP27. India also submitted a long-term development strategy to pursue the net zero emissions goal by 2070. India is on track to achieve the NDCs. And India has taken a leadership role in shaping the global agenda on climate and environment in the 2 Voice of Global South summits this year. India's approach to climate action is deeply rooted in India's civilizational ethos. India has been at the forefront in taking global initiatives against climate change, like International Solar Alliance, which has now grown to be a truly international framework, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, the Infrastructure for Resilient Island States, and Mission Life, besides, of course, the launch of the Global Biofuels Alliance on the sidelines of the G20 summit under India's presidency. India aims to preserve an effective, cooperative and equitable geo-global architecture. The Indian Pavilion at COP28 offers a unique opportunity to showcase India's positive actions on climate change digitally as well as through exhibits. It also showcases how India is undertaking its commitment to a sustainable future. Tapas Bhattacharya reports from Dubai.
So right now we are in COP28 and outside the India Pavilion. This India Pavilion showcases the work that India has done in the field of climate change as well as environmental protection. And as you can see, keeping in line with India's motto of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, we have this particular globe that is there. Also, I can tell you this interactive system is in place where all the work that India has done so far, especially when it comes to safeguarding the planet, making sure that more renewable energy is being used, is all put in this particular system. And for agriculture, if I touch this screen, the information will come through. What about blue economy? Blue economy, you get all the information that will come through in this particular screen. Then what about India's India Cooling Action Plan? So India Cooling Action Plan is also something that if you want to know, you want to get an idea, you can find all the information here. So all the important aspect of India's G20 presidency, which leads to environmental protection and climate action and making sure that we keep up the 1.5 degrees Celsius of national determined targets that have already been done, is all put in this particular place. And you can see this is done in a very aesthetic manner. The whole wall has been built showcasing India's virtue of how to safeguard the planet. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be coming in COP28 and he will be participating in the leadership summit. And as I mentioned, that it will be a major point for the governments to work together. And as it's mentioned, one earth, one family, one future. That is how the COP28 will work together, making sure that every stakeholder come forward to safeguard the planet, making it a greener and a cleaner one. With camera person Jack Shankar, this is Tapas Bhattacharya for TD India from Dubai.
And we will continue our discussion on the expectations from COP28 summit. This is a 2-week affair, and today is just day 2 and day 1 of the World Climate Action Summit, part of COP28. Dr. Chaturvedi continues to join us online, and Mr. Sanwal is here in the studio. Mr. Sanwal, I'll come to you on the very concept of climate justice, which has been championed by India. Prime Minister mentioned it in his departure statement before he left for Dubai. And it is expected that this is going to be a continuing theme going forward in COP28 and even later. This was very much there as part of India's G20 presidency. How do you look at that formulation of climate justice? Does that try to change the narrative around from what the West has been trying by pointing fingers at some of the big developing countries?
You see, the whole thing of climate change started off in 1972 in the Stockholm Conference, when the Massachusetts Institute of Technology was asked to prepare a scientific paper. That scientific paper raised the issue of global warming and treated it as a science issue of natural science, and they looked at the atmosphere as to what will happen to the atmosphere. It will lead to increase in temperature. it did not look at the causes of the problem. They looked at the symptoms of the problem. The cause of the problem was being looked at by the Europeans, and they were having conferences to deal with energy. It was at that time that the United States, as the major emitter, as the major country in the world using something like 24% of emissions, and Europe, which had the highest historical emissions, got together and formulated the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change with the World Meteorological Organization, again treating it as an issue of natural science. That is the origin of the idea of a problem, the identification of a problem. Nowhere in this discussion were the causes of the problem and the impacts on the late developers was considered. It was clear by 1970, when 3/4 of the population of Europe, North America had moved to cities, that when developing countries move to cities, urbanize, come into the middle class, this problem is going to get huge. It's going to increase manifold because the West had hardly 20% of the global population. So then the idea was that the United Nations should get into this, and climate change was treated as a common concern. That means, even though I have not created the problem, I am prepared to be part of the solution. That was in 1992 when the climate treaty was negotiated. Since then, the idea of the United States and European Union, Japan, has been to shift the burden onto developing countries, that they should do a little more than we have to do. Now, the idea behind that is very simple. They have a problem. The problem is not of increasing emissions or what they have done in the past when they did not know about the problem. The problem is that this is the direct result of middle-class lifestyles. 30% of emissions in the United States come from vehicles. In India, 10%. We don't have those number of vehicles. The number of vehicles per head of population is something like 2+. Each family has more than 2 vehicles on an average. In India, we don't even, less than 30% have a vehicle, and most of the people are going into second-hand vehicles or two-wheelers. So the second issue that came was, when the population urbanized, that more electricity was used in cities than in industry. The idea that the Industrial Revolution has caused this problem was again a misnomer, because most of the emissions, 3/4 of the GDP, 3/4 of emissions come from cities in developed countries, and it's going to happen in us also. China is moving in that direction. We are also moving in this direction. We may have a huge rural population, but that population does not use modern forms of energy. A large number of them are not even connected to the electricity grid. They use fossil fuel in the sense of firewood for cooking. So their per capita emissions are negligible, because their lifestyle, their economy is based on agriculture. It is when we move to cities that the whole thing changes. The big global shift is in urbanization. Now, the Prime Minister has picked this point up. Researchers were talking about it. Discussions were taking place, but he has crystallized it by saying 2 things. One, you have mentioned lifestyle for environment. He's saying, look, it's a lifestyle issue. Take another example. We treat diabetes as a disease, but people are saying it's a lifestyle disease. It is because of our lifestyle that we have brought it upon us. We change our lifestyles, we have a good chance of curing it. Similarly, he's saying change the lifestyle. Do not waste electricity. India has traditionally been very frugal. For example, we use a bucket of hot water in winter. The West uses a shower. The amount of water that is needed, the amount of heating that is needed is many times. They have bigger cars. They travel long distance. China is sorting it out by going into rail transport in a very big way. We are also following that track. We are laying new rail tracks. We want to go into railways in a very big way. So it is a lifestyle issue in a wider sense. Now, to link with lifestyle and related to the climate negotiations that are going on, the Prime Minister has talked of climate justice. He is saying, I don't want you to focus only on historical responsibility, which has been the trend since till recently. For the first time, Prime Minister raised climate justice in the UNESCO conference in 2018 and after that in the United Nations. And because of India's insistence, it has gone into the negotiated text. Of course, nobody has accepted it as a commitment, but it is there. Now, he is pushing it further. He pushed it in the G20 in his own way. Because to make a change in the United Nations system, in the multilateral system, it takes a lot of time. We have come to COP28, which means 27 years have passed by. And now we are talking of a regular timetable, a stocktake, and a target. So he's introduced this idea. He keeps pushing this idea in every forum. And I think the central point is that we need to start shifting away from the sole reliance on fossil fuels, because here is a country, and there are many others like us in Africa, who don't have even any electricity at all. Now, one example of this has been in the recent discussions in Dubai itself, where a thought was put forward that we should regulate methane emissions. Yes. The issue is not carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere of 1,000 years. Methane stays there for 20 years. So if we can cut down methane, we can delay the warming. Mm-hmm. But what was not said was we can continue to use fossil fuels. We can continue to use the lifestyle that we already have. Now, India has made that point very forcefully there, that there is something called luxury emissions and something called survival emissions. That for India, methane is a survival emission because it is related to the cattle population, it is related to paddy cultivation. Food security. Cattle population is also linked to food security because of the cow dung that is used instead of fertilizer, which may be very costly for the small farmers. So we have already started making that point. Now, when you start making these
India
points...
has a nuanced position on both, on coal as well as methane. Yes.
Well, so, and on coal also, India is saying that, look, we are going to expand our renewable energy, but we need the base load for coal. No country in the world has modernized without the use of coal as the base load. No country. And today, we do not have the battery technology, as we have just heard. We do not have the grid capacity to replace this. And this is still the cheapest fuel. And apart from that, the point that is being made now is that, look, you use twice as much oil as you use coal. So why not all fossil fuels? Now, that the West is not prepared to do. So the Prime Minister it is only when the Prime Minister gives a certain direction, right, that, look, there is climate justice, there is about life, we want to change the framework, then the negotiators of the country can then get up and say that these are luxury emissions and these are survival emissions and we cannot agree to any cut in methane.
Now, the focus is on the solutions. As far as India is concerned, it has been a solution provider on the issue of climate action. So, Dr. Chaturvedi, your thoughts on the need for focusing more on adaptation? There's so much focus on mitigation, but even funding, I understand, out of the whole of the gamut of climate finance, just 5% comes to adaptation, 95% still goes to mitigation. Besides that, there is likely to be focus in the summit on green credit as well as lead IT. So, what is the overall picture of solutions that you see emerging from COP28 and from India's leadership there as the voice of the Global South?
Sure. So there are different kinds of solutions in different buckets that we're talking about. One is the mitigation bucket, as we talked about. Second is adaptation. And in fact, the point that was made that finance has been kind of by and large solved in the first day itself, it's only a partial point, because that finance that we've seen in the first day it only relates to loss and damage. There's still no mention of mitigation finance. There's no mention of adaptation finance, right? So the two big buckets, there's nothing on that. Even in the loss and damage, what the financial commitments that we have seen are voluntary commitments, right? It is not an institutional kind of mechanism that will ensure that the finance for loss and damage is sustained. Also, it has to be replenished periodically, right? So even the whatever, it's a great start, I would say. But let's not say that we have solved the problem of even loss and damage finance. It's only some voluntary commitment being made. The demand is, or the need is actually far greater. So we need sustained finance that can be replenished on the loss and damage front. Now, coming to the solutions on the mitigation and adaptation, I think one very interesting thing is on mitigation side, if you look at the list of technologies that are solutions, let's say solar, right?
Right, we'll be going across. Dr. Chaturvedi, please hold your thoughts. Today is day 2 of COP28 and day 1 of the World Climate Action Summit. That's Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressing.
आज सबसे पहले मैं आप सभी का आभार व्यक्त करूंगा। मेरे द्वारा उठाए गए क्लाइमेट जस्टिस, क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस और ग्रीन क्रेडिट जैसे विषयों को आपने निरंतर समर्थन दिया है। हम सभी के प्रयासों से ये विश्वास बढ़ा है कि विश्व कल्याण के लिए सबके हितों की सुरक्षा आवश्यक है, सबकी भागीदारी आवश्यक है। फ्रेंड्स, आज भारत ने इकोलॉजी और इकोनॉमी के उत्तम संतुलन का उदाहरण विश्व के सामने रखा है। भारत में विश्व की 17% आबादी होने के बावजूद 17% आबादी होने के बावजूद ग्लोबल कार्बन एमिशंस में हमारी हिस्सेदारी ओनली 4% से भी कम है। भारत विश्व की उन कुछ इकोनॉमीज में से एक है जो एनडीसी टारगेट्स को पूरा करने की राह पर है। एमिशंस इंटेंसिटी संबंधी टारगेट्स को हमने 11 साल पहले ही हासिल कर लिया है। नॉन फॉसिल फ्यूल टारगेट्स को हम निर्धारित समय से 9 साल पहले ही प्राप्त कर चुके हैं और भारत ने इतने पर ही नहीं रुके हैं। हमारा लक्ष्य 2030 तक एमिशंस इंटेंसिफाई को 45% घटाना है। हमने तय किया है कि नॉन फॉसिल फ्यूल का शेयर हम बढ़ाकर 50% करेंगे और हम 2070 तक नेट जीरो के लक्ष्य की तरफ भी बढ़ते रहेंगे। फ्रेंड्स, भारत ने अपनी G20 प्रेसिडेंसी में वन अर्थ, वन फैमिली, वन फ्यूचर की भावना के साथ क्लाइमेट के विषय को निरंतर महत्व दिया है। सस्टेनेबल फ्यूचर के लिए हमने मिलकर ग्रीन डेवलपमेंट पैक्ट पर सहमति बनाई। हमने लाइफस्टाइल फॉर सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट के सिद्धांत तय किए। हमने वैश्विक स्तर पर रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी को 3 गुना करने की प्रतिबद्धता जताई। भारत ने ऑल्टरनेट फ्यूल्स के लिए हाइड्रोजन के क्षेत्र को बढ़ावा दिया और ग्लोबल बायोफ्यूल्स अलायंस भी लॉन्च किया। हम मिलकर इस नतीजे पर पहुंचे कि क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस कमिटमेंट को बिलियन से बढ़ाकर कई ट्रिलियन तक ले जाने की आवश्यकता है। साथियों, ग्लासगो में भारत ने आइलैंड स्टेट्स के लिए इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर रेजिलिएंट इनिशिएटिव की शुरुआत की थी। भारत 13 देशों में इससे जुड़े प्रोजेक्ट्स तेजी से आगे बढ़ा रहा है। ग्लासगो में ही मैंने मिशन लाइफ स्टाइल फॉर एनवायरनमेंट का विजन आपके सामने रखा था। इंटरनेशनल एनर्जी एजेंसी की स्टडी कहती है कि इस अप्रोच से हम 2030 तक प्रति वर्ष 2 बिलियन टन कार्बन एमिशन कम कर सकते हैं। आज मैं इस फोरम से एक और प्रो प्लैनेट, प्रोएक्टिव और पॉजिटिव इनिशिएटिव का आह्वान कर रहा हूं। यह है ग्रीन क्रेडिट इनिशिएटिव। यह कार्बन क्रेडिट की कॉमर्शियल मानसिकता से आगे बढ़कर जन भागीदारी से कार्बन सिंक बनाने का अभियान है। मैं उम्मीद करता हूं कि आप सब इससे जरूर जुड़ेंगे। साथियों, पिछली शताब्दी की गलतियों को सुधारने के लिए हमारे पास बहुत ज्यादा समय नहीं है। मानव जाति के एक छोटे हिस्से ने प्रकृति का अंधाधुंध दोहन किया, लेकिन इसकी कीमत पूरी मानवता को चुकानी पड़ रही है। विशेषकर ग्लोबल साउथ के निवासियों को सिर्फ मेरा भला हो, ये सोच दुनिया को एक अंधेरे की तरफ ले जाएगी। इस हॉल में बैठा प्रत्येक व्यक्ति, प्रत्येक राष्ट्राध्यक्ष बहुत बड़ी जिम्मेदारी के साथ यहां आया है। हम में से सभी को अपने दायित्व निभाने ही होंगे। पूरी दुनिया आज हमें देख रही है, इस धरती का भविष्य हमें देख रहा है। हमें सफल होना ही होगा। वी हैव टू बी डिसिसिव। हमें संकल्प लेना होगा कि हर देश अपने लिए जो क्लाइमेट टारगेट तय कर रहा है, जो कमिटमेंट कर रहा है, वो पूरा कर ही दिखाएगा। वी हैव टू वर्क इन यूनिटी। हमें संकल्प लेना होगा कि हम मिलकर काम करेंगे, एक दूसरे का सहयोग करेंगे, साथ देंगे। हमें ग्लोबल कार्बन बजट में सभी विकासशील देशों को उचित शेयर देना होगा। वी हैव टू बी मोर बैलेंस। हमें यह संकल्प लेना होगा कि एडॉप्शन, मिटिगेशन, क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस, टेक्नोलॉजी, लॉस एंड डैमेज, इन सब पर संतुलन बनाते हुए आगे बढ़ें। वी हैव टू बी एम्बिशियस। हमें संकल्प लेना होगा कि एनर्जी ट्रांजिशन जस्ट हो, इंक्लूसिव हो, इक्विटेबल हो। वी हैव टू बी इनोवेटिव। हमें यह संकल्प लेना होगा कि इनोवेटिव टेक्नोलॉजी का लगातार विकास करें, अपने स्वार्थ से ऊपर उठकर दूसरे देशों को टेक्नोलॉजी ट्रांसफर करें, क्लीन एनर्जी सप्लाई चेन को सशक्त करें। फ्रेंड, भारत यूएन फ्रेमवर्क फॉर क्लाइमेट चेंज प्रोसेस के प्रति प्रतिबद्ध है। इसलिए आज मैं इस मंच से 2028 में COP28 में COP33 समिट को भारत में होस्ट करने का प्रस्ताव भी रखता हूं। मुझे आशा है कि आने वाले 12 दिनों में ग्लोबल स्टॉक टेक की समीक्षा से हमें सुरक्षित और उज्जवल भविष्य का रास्ता मिलेगा। कल लॉस एंड डैमेज फंड को ऑपरेशनलाइज करने का जो निर्णय लिया गया है, उससे हम सभी की उम्मीद और बड़ी है। मुझे विश्वास है यूएई की मेजबानी में ये COP28 समिट सफलता की नई ऊंचाई पर पहुंचेगी। मैं मेरे ब्रदर हिज हाइनेस शेख मोहम्मद बिन जायद और संयुक्त राष्ट्र संघ के सेक्रेटरी जनरल हिज एक्सेलेंसी गुटरेज को मुझे ये विशेष सम्मान देने के लिए विशेष रूप से आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। आप सभी का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। थैंक यू।
तो COP28 में आपने
there you heard Prime Minister Narendra Modi speaking at the ceremonial opening of the high-level segment for head of states and Prime Minister spoke about India's vision at the COP28 summit. Very importantly, the Prime Minister announced that India will be hosting the COP33 summit. Remember, this year the COP28 summit is going on, so in another 5 years, India will be hosting the COP33 summit. And the Prime Minister announced the Green Credit Initiative. He said, I'm taking this opportunity to launch the Green Credit Initiative, which he said basically focuses on moving away from the commercial approach of carbon credit towards a participatory approach of carbon sink. The Prime Minister also appealed to the developed world, saying that we must deliver on our commitments. The world is watching us and the future is staring at us. The Prime Minister called for a balanced approach between adaptation, mitigation, climate finance, technology and loss and damage, and said that the decision to operationalize the loss and damage fund that was announced yesterday by the COP28 presidency is a shot in the arm in the efforts towards climate action. So let's get perspective now on Prime Minister's statements. Mr. Sanwal, the first word perhaps the Prime Minister used was climate justice. And would you say that the entire speech today is well within the contours of climate justice?
See, it is not only within the contours of climate justice, as you have said. He is defining or elaborating on climate justice.
Yes.
And by saying and doing that, he is also dissociating himself from the divisive attitudes that have prevailed for 27 COPs. He made that point not very directly. He said we must move forward in a spirit of cooperation, and rather than pointing fingers at each other. He said you must fulfill your commitments. He did not say you must enhance your commitments. He said whatever commitment you have made in this forum, please take action to fulfill it. He's not saying that you should do more or less. He is coming out as a cooperative figure, as a figure that is integrating this fragmented process in a very, very positive manner. Look at how he started. He says that, look, I have only contributed 4%. United States has contributed 24%, China 16%, European Union something in the same region. And they have contributed nearly 2/3 of the problem, and India is only 4%. And yet he says, I am doing this. He talked about finance, not again in terms of commitments, that look, you made a commitment, you are not following your commitment, and you are a villain, and I am the victim. What he said was that, look, I am doing so much. I am going to double my target of renewable energy. I am prepared to do more, but where is the money? I need the money to do this. Right. He's not again saying, you give me the money. He's saying, I'm going to do this, but I need funds. There have to be funds, have to be available for me to do this in a very positive manner. And as you pointed out, he said, look, we have to take all these areas of implementation,
yes,
that is mitigation, adaptation, finance, technology.
Will you just take this forward? I have to thank Dr. Chaturvedi, but before that I will ask him a question. We were discussing about India's solution-centric approach, and here we are looking at India hosting the COP33 going forward. Besides that, India announcing the Green Credit Initiative. How significant do you think is this, and what sort of a epochal and path-breaking vision does the Green Credit Initiative entail?
Yes. So I think first of all, the COP33 announcement, that India will host it and is proposed to host it. I think it's one of the biggest announcements. That means India is very willing to play the ambition game. And why it is also very important, because the global stocktake is a 5-year process. So today is this COP is the first global stocktake. The second one will be in 2028. So India is going to basically host the COP in the second global stocktake process, where the collective there's scrutiny for many of these things that India is. So it's a very smart move to place not just an any COP, but the second global stocktake COP is what India is going to host, or at least it is proposed to host. The great, great initiative and announcement on green credit scheme. It's very interesting because incentives are very, very important. And carbon market is a very successful incentive platform. But what he clearly said, that going beyond this whole, focusing only on the carbon, we have to think about a lot more. So trees are not just about carbon, trees are about biodiversity. Trees have got so many different benefits. So he talked about green credit scheme, especially for carbon sink enhancement. Right? So I think a very important incentive instrument that is being announced by the government of India at this platform. Already we have the green credit kind of announced within the domestic policy. Now he has taken it further, a step further, and he's kind of announced it as an international platform. And he's also invited many other countries to start thinking about the green credit kind of scheme. And for all we know, like a carbon market trading, the global carbon market trading we see, we might be seeing green credits being traded around the world. And that is going to be fantastic, because it's not just carbon market is great, but this is kind of a step further, because it talks about something beyond carbon markets and much more about like biodiversity conservation and something like that. Finally, I also want to emphasize on climate finance. He said, we are not talking about billions, we need to talk about trillions now. Right? It's a very important comment being made very clearly, because the developed world is still trying to put, billions here and there, on the table. He has made a very emphatic statement that it's about trillions. And then, of course, the carbon budget, he talked about many things, fair share and the global carbon budget. So the whole justice, he talked kind of broken it down, fair share of the global carbon budget, and then just inclusive and equitable energy transition. So clearly, this has been an important thing for India, and he has emphasized at this level. This is only his third visit to a COP. So it is an important, it's not that he visits all the COPs, right? So it's a third visit, so it's an important COP, GST COP, and very important announcement that India hopefully will host the COP 33rd COP 5 years from now, which will be the second official GST, process. So we look forward. Very interesting announcement.
Thank you, Dr. Vaibhav Chaturvedi, for joining us. It was a pleasure to speak to you. And joining us now is Dr. Arunabha Ghosh. She is the CEO of the Council for Energy, Environment and Water. So she'll be joining us in just a bit. But to continue with you, Mr. Sanwal, the past, present and future in the context of climate justice and the various new initiatives that have been announced, especially the one on green credit initiative. How significant is that? How will this work according to you practically, the green credit initiative?
He has indicated a direction. He has indicated a direction of India's policy, the way India looks at this process, and he has essentially told the COP, all the assembled people, that this is the direction you should think about, because I'm speaking for the global south. He didn't say so in so many words or emphatically, but these are the issues of the global south, not for one country or the other, but the entire lot of developing countries have this kind of idea, this kind of concern, and they have not been able to voice their interest. His speech was short, which means that people heard it, imbibed it, every sentence had meaning. Now this will be picked up by the negotiators and elaborated further. So, but when we look at the package as a whole, you can see how the elements link together. I contribute only 4%, but I have a 17% population, so I must get my fair share.
Right.
Your population is much less, you are taking more. He has not said so, but the implication is clear.
Right.
He doesn't need to say so. It is the Prime Minister who's talking, giving a direction and an opening statement. He doesn't want to ramble around. He wants to make the point very directly. So he said, look, I want my fair share. So he has covered all the points of the global south while not using the terminology that has been used for 27 years and including in the climate treaty, which was divisive. As soon as he says that you have not paid the money, somebody will come back and say, but I have not, and you have not done this. He has risen above that. And I think he and the president of COP, who made a similar statement in his opening remarks, that we must start a new direction. We must look at the whole process differently. I think he has contributed very solidly for this. This will be appreciated. Then we come to the specifics. He has indicated some new ideas, just as you pointed out, that there is something called clean credit. Nobody has been talking about credit so far. People have been talking about new and additional financial resources. Give me grant, give me concessional funding. Why have you not given me what you have pledged? He's saying, let's look at it a little differently. Because climate is not the only problem we are facing. There is also global biodiversity crisis that is taking place, and the two are linked by forests. The forest issue links these two global concerns. So let's try to find a way that we can deal with nature as a whole, and not just with the industrial economy or cities where we are living, but nature on which we are dependent. So he's saying, why not have some kind of a credit scheme for this? So you benefit out of the carbon that is sequestered, you are continuing to pollute, you provide some funds, and it helps the local communities, it helps the world, and you need to pay for it. Without saying so very clearly, he says there is a credit. The credit is not in terms of the money, the credit in terms of what carbon is absorbed by the trees, by nature, which you can then take credit for.
Which could mean more afforestation.
More afforestation, and it could mean that you can take a little longer time to reduce your emissions, because part of it can be met from the credit from this. And I think the word credit is also very significant. He's not saying that I will sell this to you or you buy this from me. He's saying essentially it is a credit.
Yes.
Because you can use the word credit in the financial sense, or you can use credit in the moral or practical sense, and they're saying I'm doing something for you and it is benefiting you, or that it is for the future that I'm taking care of.
Interesting. We'll take this forward. Let's welcome the other guest who's joining us. Dr. Arunabha Ghosh is the Chief Executive Officer of CEEW, which stands for Council for Energy, Environment and Water. Dr. Arunabha, such a pleasure to have you on this special broadcast. What is the most striking aspect to your mind from the Prime Minister's address?
I think there are two big striking.
We've lost your audio.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. There are two important aspects that we should highlight. The first is the mechanisms he's outlined for collaboration across the world to drive climate action forward. This is, of course, the reference to the Green Credit Initiative. This will probably build on what India itself has announced just last month, the Green Credit Scheme, which is focused for afforestation and for water conservation, over and above the Indian carbon market that is being developed. So the point is that we can't only think about carbon, we have to think about carbon in the context of biodiversity, forests are sinks of carbon, but also the other adaptation-related issues such as water. Now, in order to take a national example that India is setting and take it global, is basically reaching out to the rest of the world and saying that if you've got to work on this together, here's an initiative in which you can join hands. The other thing that was particularly interesting for me was his re-emphasis on lifestyles. He had brought this to attention in 2021 in his Glasgow speech when he talked about lifestyle and environment. Last year, India announced the mission on life at home. And this year, under our G20 presidency, the high-level principles on lifestyles for sustainable development were agreed by all G20 countries. So again, it's something that India is walking the talk, and there is now an eco-mark scheme that India is initiating at home. But drawing attention to lifestyles is important because, as I myself said in our press conference this morning, the research from CW shows that even the richest 10% individuals in developing countries like India, Brazil, and others have a lower carbon footprint than the average person in developed countries. So unless we start thinking about lifestyle and sustainable production and sustainable consumption as a central pillar of climate action, we will keep having supply-side push of more renewables or more electric vehicles, etc., without reducing at scale and at pace the emissions and the resource requirements that are needed. The final thing that was, of course, very exciting was his offer to host the COP33 summit in 2028. I think that, again, like we did with our G20 presidency, gives India an opportunity to shape the agenda for the world and make sure that the voice of the global south and equity and climate justice are put front and center, but not just in a rhetorical way, but in very concrete terms in an action-oriented agenda.
Also, Dr. Ghosh, I'll take another question with you on how he emphasized on the need for a balanced approach towards adaptation, mitigation, climate finance, technology, loss and damage.
It's absolutely critical because as this year's global stocktake will identify, the planet is certainly off track, as are the individual trajectories of many of the countries, especially the richer ones. Again, CW's report from last week shows that the developed countries as per their nationally determined contributions for 2030, have promised to reduce emissions by 36%, against what the IPCC says should be 43%. But in reality, our calculations show that on current trajectory, this decade, they will reduce emissions by only 11%. This is a huge implementation gap, which swallows up another 3.7 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent of carbon space. This is why Prime Minister Modi's reference to carbon space being available and available in a just and fair way to all countries was a very important statement that he put out right at the outset in today's plenary. Now, while that carbon space is being swallowed up and the temperatures continue to rise, there is a huge challenge of the adaptation, loss and damage issue, which is why a global goal on adaptation is of central concern to developing countries, as well as capitalizing the loss and damage fund, which was formally announced yesterday. If you look at some of the contributions coming into the loss and damage fund, honestly, they are very, very small. Some of the contributions, $17 million from the United States, there are homes in California that cost more than $17 million. So I think we have to get serious about protecting the vulnerable for facing the consequences of someone else's actions, even as we work together, as the Prime Minister said, on dealing with the crisis in future together.
Stay with us, Dr. Ghosh. Let's get ground perspective now from our correspondent Tapas Bhattacharya, who's covering the COP28 summit in Dubai. Tapas, big news, India will be hosting the COP33 in 2028. What is the response that you are getting to that and to yet another initiative that India has announced of a green credit initiative?
Absolutely. In fact, green credit is something that Indian government has been talking about. In fact, they have notified in October, if I'm not wrong, in the green budget regarding an outlay, financial outlay of almost 3,700 crore. I've checked exact figure, but that's something that the government, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has notified, and they want to work on that. And this has been Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision of taking the development in a sustainable manner. Because remember, we are talking about climate justice and talking about climate change. And if you want to, develop a country, the onus is on the head to give a leadership, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi has provided that leadership, a much needed leadership in the last decade or so, and something that has been envisioned in his mission for lifestyle, as he also mentioned that in COP26 I was lucky that he was there, and he mentioned that mission life will be a major point, and from then onward all the ministries, everybody worked on in tandem with that, and now they want to take this green credit to international level and want to collaborate with all the stakeholders. It is something that has been in the pipeline for a while, and something that the world now is looking up to. The carbon credit is something that we all talk about, but there is still a lot of gaps in its how a carbon credit can be given, who are the agencies which will provide those carbon credits. But this particular green credit initiative is expected to be a major game changer, especially for a country like India, especially for businessmen and other stakeholders who want to go ahead and develop the country, but at the same time are careful enough to walk a tightrope between development one hand and sustainability on the other hand. So it's a great initiative, and what a way to tell the world that come to India, we are going to host the COP30 here, and 2028 that's going to be a day when a year when they will be looking forward to come to India, because again, I have to understand that India is playing a role of leadership position, especially for the global south. So that's something again has to be taken into consideration. So thumbs up on the first day, first show for Prime Minister Modi, and huge round of applause for the way he has championed the cause of the global south. Again,
Yes.
I had the privilege to talk to the Serbian president, and he said that Prime Minister Modi is not just a great leader, but he's a great leader, and the countries, not just the south, developing countries, but the developed countries are also looking forward to him to give him to provide leadership to them.
Absolutely. We'll leave it at that. Tapas, 2 more events to go for the Prime Minister to address and attend. One is, of course, a session on green credit. Perhaps we'll know more about the green credit initiative that the Prime Minister has launched, and another on Lead IT event. But we'll leave it at that, Tapas. Pleasure to talk to you from Dubai. And just the last word I'll give to you, Mr. Sanwal, on this is just day 2 of the COP28, day 1 of the World Climate Action Summit. Another several days to go. Overall, it's a fortnight affair. What are your expectations from COP28's outcome document?
As I said earlier, this is the United Nations process that has been going on for 27 years. This is the 28th COP.
Yes.
You cannot change a huge tanker on a very sharp turn. It takes a long curve and it takes time to change. What the Prime Minister has done is building on the G20 that we need a change in direction. Each sentence you can see has not used the phrases of the past. It is a change in direction is needed. And I think that will be picked up by the negotiators in the coming discussion. We have already heard them say that there's a distinction between luxury emissions and survival emissions, and they are going to carry this forward, the carbon budget space, the per capita, and the issue of balance. I think the issue of balance is very important because so far the debate has been that mitigation is more important than adaptation, and the developing countries have been arguing that adaptation is equally, if not more important for us, because it is likely to lead to displacement of populations, and huge populations may be displaced. Now, Prime Minister has not gone into that debate.
Yes.
He has started a new discussion and saying, let us have a balance. I think it is these directions, it is these indications that are going to have the most important impact on the COP as it progresses, and one will see. We have just heard the comment from Dubai that developed countries, so Slovenia, has also said that, look, we are looking for him to give leadership, because here is a country, a large population, who is prepared to do more than they would have done otherwise, and let us listen to them carefully, because maybe what they have to say is something sensible. Maybe that is what we were looking for, to bridge this gap between different viewpoints, and let us come around to an idea.
So on that note, we will call it a day as far as this broadcast is concerned, but the focus on COP28 and Prime Minister's upcoming events, his addresses at COP28 in Dubai will continue. We'll thank Mr. Sanwal for joining us and sharing a very, very enlightening perspective with us, and also Dr. Ghosh for speaking to us on this extremely important day when Prime Minister has yet again given policy direction in a sense and given the world some guidance on how to go ahead in tackling the challenge of climate change. So that's it there in this special broadcast, COP28, World Unites for Climate Action. News and updates will continue on DD India. Stay tuned.